Okay, okay. So we are on Daf Nun Beis and Aleph, and of course, the last week or two we've quoted the Mishnah where we have sort of transversed in talking about Ona and in talking about Shtus. We went from things, merchandise, actually all kinds of chafetzim. What is considered Ona, whether it's food or whether it's objects of sale. And the Mishnah then told us on Nun Aleph on the days that there's something called Oinoas Mamon, that we also have Oinoah in the money that we use, in the money system, the coins. And we went through that. In other words, coins get rubbed out. And so we think, oh, big deal, it gets rubbed out. We still use a dime, a quarter, a nickel. But apparently you see that in the halacha, that was a big factor, that when coins started rubbing out and were not worth what was face value, that itself reduced the value and created a situation of oinah. Now the amount of oinah is different because we had a machlekes by us, it's a shtus primarily 1/6. In the Mishnah, there is a machlekes between Rav Meir, Rav Yehuda, and Rav Shimon. And actually, the fractions are a bit different. According to Rav Meir, it's the reduction to make it fraud is 1/24. According to Rav Yehuda, it's 1/12. And according to Rav Shimon, who is consistent, it's 1/6, just as it is for everything else, for chafetzim, for food, for everything else. So Rav Shimon is the one who's consistent, but Meir and Rav Yehuda take a different view. Now, just quickly summarizing, the question was, why is there a difference? Just to understand why we distinguish between coins on the one hand and everything else on the other hand. So again, in front of Shimon, it doesn't matter, it's the same, but the difference, the underlying difference has to do with the fact of what's more choshev. In other words, an item, and he uses the term for a garment. He says when a person buys a garment, psychologically, he's willing to pay up to a sixth more if the garment is slightly nicer. In other words, or even if it's comparable to another item, he's not going to be makbid up to a sixth. That's what the Gemara brings down. He says, the Amri Inchi Ashik Legabov, that I'll overpay for something that protects me, that makes me warm, it makes me look nice. But when it comes to food and other items, he says that no, I won't overpay. If the price of apples or the price of bananas or bread or potatoes is this, then I don't want to overpay. And if I overpay, then I will consider it to be fraud. So that's a psychological thing that, again, in the times of the Gemara, they had to think about that. Maybe because food, at least the basics, they were able to get, so they didn't say, why should I overpay for food? But when it came to a nice item of clothing or something along those lines, that was already more advanced malacha. People had to put it together, and so they said, fine, okay, that will pay a little bit more for. So that's the intrinsic difference between the Gemara that we were learning about items, chafetzim, and when it comes to now it comes to money. So now we also had a machlokes between the Mishnah and the Brisa in terms of how the shtus was presented. Remember, we said that the Mishnah uses the words "kamati asela chasera v'lo yeh." How much is a seller can be reduced in a value and it would not be onah. The Brisa, on the other hand, uses the term "akamati asela chasera v'yeh bayonah." And how much can it be reduced? And there is onah. And since the Mishnah and the Brisa quote the same proportions for Rav Meir and Rabbi Yehuda, the Gemara asks the kasha, it looks like a stira. because the Mishnah says it's not oino. If let's say it's a 24th or a 12th, and we from the Brisa, it looks like it is oino. So we answered that question as well by saying one is top down and one is bottom up. Really, when you hit that mark of 124th or 112 or 16, it is oino. The question is, when you verbalize it, are you verbalizing it from the bottom up? So you're getting from less to more, or you're stating it from the top down, you're starting with the highest amount. So everybody, the Mishnah and the Brisa, agree that the Shiurim given, which we're going to repeat now in this Gemara, are ono. They are ono. It says, but when it says the low ono or ono, it depends on how you perceive it, how you look at it. So that was the other main question that was answered. So now we're up to the Gufa, and Gufa starts at about, let's see here, starting from the Gemara, maybe about 6 or 7 lines down. Maybe a couple more, no, maybe a little bit more, maybe 8, 9 lines down. So the middle of the line, it says Gufa. So now we're going to actually go into the full Brisa, because till now we just quoted the first words of the Brisa, which said Ad kamitia chasera v'yeh bo'ano. So now the Brisa is, we're going to read the full Brisa, and from there we'll understand what we're talking about. Says, so the Gemara says Gufa. This is the text of the Brisa. Ad kamitia sela chasera v'yeh bo'ano. How much can a sela? Now remember, a sela was the main coin of the realm, and all the other denominations started. So the sela you might say it's $1, and then we go a half $1, a quarter $1, whatever it happens to be. So the sela is what's used as the barometer for our discussion. How much can a sela be reduced in its volume, meaning in its physical volume? And there is oino. So we quoted Rabbi Omer, Arbi Isorais, 4 Isorais Isur dinner. 1 Isur per dinner, which we calculated was 1/24. So that's 1/24 of the sela gets rubbed out. You are talking about fraud. It no longer is a sela. And when you trade it as a sela, you're basically committing fraud, because you're buying something with a sela that doesn't have the value of its face value. Yehuda Omer. Now, again, today, maybe it's hard to envision because we don't worry about these things, maybe because full faith and credit. I mean, that may be the main reason, is that when we have a dime that looks almost rubbed out, then it's still a dime. Who worries about it? I mean, and most people will take it over the counter as cash. Once in a while, someone may say, I don't want this coin. But for the most part, it is what it is.
The key is because our coins are not valued directly in the weight based on the weight of the metal. That's the key difference.
That's the key difference, right. So therefore, the coin itself can still be the chayfetz.
No, it's presumably they've had issues with pennies, when a penny at times, and they've adjusted the mix of metals, at times a penny has been worth more than a penny of copper. And then these things play in the other direction.
The other direction, right. So again, but we see that we're not as makbid maybe as in the time of the Gemara, when they were much more particular about these valuations. Now, Rabbi Yehuda says the Brisa, that we measure it by pundionos, pundion ladiner. So the 4 pundios in a sela, a pundio bediner. So according to Rabbi Yehuda's cheshbon, it's 1/12. When it gets reduced to 1/12, exactly at 1/12, it is oino, because then already it doesn't have the value. And Rav Shimon, who in our Mishnah was the one who said it was shtus, he says again, shmona pundionos, 8 pundionos in the sela, shnei pundion ladinar, and therefore it comes out to be a 6. So Rav Shimon is the only one who is consistent between money and chayfetz. And he says that 1/6 is always the amount that we look at. And Stam Mishnah, we said the Stam Mishnah was Rav Shimon. So Rav Shimon is the one the other Mishnah. So that's the price itself. Now, here's the postscript to this brisa. Yeser al kain, yeser al kain. If the amount of erosion was more than this, meaning it didn't reach to a 24th or a 12th or a 6th, then says the brisa, merchro b'shava, you can sell it for face value. So in other words, there's no such thing as partial reduction, right? In other words, we don't say, oh, if it reduced, let's say 1/32 or some number above according to a mayor, you know what? We got to take a little tick off the value of this coin. So in other words, if you don't reach this number, you're good to go for the full face value. That everybody agrees upon, and therefore you don't have to worry about, oh, this looks a little bit rubbed out. How much should I reduce the value of the purchase because it's not quite pristine? So the Gemara says, don't worry about it. If we're not reaching these numbers, forget about the whole thing. We don't have anything to worry about. And Rashi says, what? So Mokra b'Shavia says Rashi. We have that Rashi here. He says, okay, Mokra b'Shavia the common mafarish lo yisera al kain shelo tiye kidei ano, that there shouldn't be a no at all. Mokra b'Shavia b'Sela yofen. It's like a perfectly minted sela, and you're allowed to use it for the full face value. So until you reach that magic fraction, you're good to go. Okay. Now the question becomes, what do you do with such a coin? So, okay, fine. We've reached the understanding that these coins are dangerous. That you have to be careful not to commit fraud. So what do we do? So we know, at least to the extent that it's been highlighted. I guess they do this with coins as well. Anybody can weigh in, but I know with bills, because I've seen it, is that bills are regularly burned at different facilities. I guess they collect old bills, they put them together, they burn them, and they're out of circulation. With coins, in all likelihood, it's the same thing. These coins are shipped to a place.
Well, coins presumably
melted down, right?
Could be melted down and reused as long as it's the same mix of metals.
Right. So we have a mechanism for getting rid of them. So now the question was, what did Chazal do? The Chazal didn't have big burning mints, burning factories, or I don't think they had melting facilities where they melted coins. This wasn't as advanced. So what did they do in the time of the Gemara? Says the Gemara, Atkama Yiposach Rishoy Lekaima. So now there's a different question. How much can the coin be reduced? In other words, okay, it's one thing if you say that it's reduced 1/24 or 1/12, and now we have an Ainor situation. But does that mean we give up the coin? Or is there a different sort of measure for when the coin itself has to be removed? So now says the Gemara as follows: B'sela at shekel. Okay, we know there are 2 shekalim in a seller. So he says that for and seller was the main coin. The seller at shekel. For a seller, if it's worn down to a shekel, in other words, to half of its value, then now when we said a shekel, we don't mean to actually say a shekel, because if it's worn down to a shekel, then it can be used as a shekel. So in theory, what we're saying here, if the seller got beaten up and was worn down to below a shekel, below half of its value, then you have to get rid of it. So that makes sense, because if you have a seller, let's say it's $1, and then it comes down to a shekel, okay, so now people have to get used to it, but this seller will now be traded as a shekel. That in itself becomes a little problematic. We're going to see, because will people be confused? Wait a minute, is it a seller? Is it a shekel? What am I doing? But if it gets rubbed down below a shekel, then the Gemara says you have to get rid of it. in reality, and I'm just going to say this because we're going to say it in a minute, there is a coin below a shekel. It's called a dinar, right? So l'chayra, one might ask, why does it not have value even below a shekel up to a dinar? But the Gemara is going to address that in a minute. But for our purposes, if it falls below half of its value, the Gemara is telling us it has to be taken out of circulation.
Excuse me, Rabbi.
Yeah.
Do we assume that, I mean, this coin has been involved with commerce for years? So it's not, so it's in somebody's hand. Do we assume that everybody knows how to weigh the coin itself and know when it's decreased in value? What assumptions do we have here about accuracy for commerce? What do we assume about each person's ability to determine whether it's been rubbed down or not rubbed down?
Right. So
there has to be some assumption here about the capability of the average person.
Right. No, it's an excellent question because not everybody is whatever the term is for coinologist. Not everybody is
numismatist, I think.
What's that?
Numismatist.
Okay. Not everybody is considered to be an expert that way. What the Gemara is telling us, though, is that everybody who deals with coins can look at a coin. Let's just say, for argument's sake, a seller was I'm making it up, 2 inches in diameter and a half an inch in depth in thickness. That's what a seller looked like, right? It was a round, flat coin. Everybody knew it. It gets used, time in, time out. All of a sudden, a guy's getting change and he looks at this coin and says, "What? This coin is flat as a pancake." And by the way, for the most part, it's the thickness that determines, not the diameter, because diameters don't change. If you have a coin that has a 2-inch diameter, what's the likelihood that over time that diameter is going to change? Right? A dime, a nickel, a quarter. We don't
actually diameters do change. And in our current,
how many times do you see distorted dimes?
We don't these days, but coins in general, that's why the quarter has the ridged edge. Because right, if it was filed off or just worn off, you would know and you'd say, aha, that's not the way it's supposed to be.
Right. But I think we can take from this that, and the Gemara does verify that it's not diameter so much that we're worried about.
Right. It's certainly easier to compare the diameter.
You can see diameter.
Right.
Naked eye. You cannot necessarily
correct
see the width,
thickness,
the depth of a coin, and know that it's 10% lower than what it should be.
That's exactly
right. In order for the depth to change, it has to be even. I mean, if you turn a coin over and you see that it's not even, then you know the depth's been, somehow lowered in different parts of the bottom of the coin. I mean, so the question is, to what extent do we rely on the guesswork in the commerce? I mean,
right, unless you have a very accurate scale on the level of grams and ounces, you're not going to be able to measure anything close to a 12th or a 24th or whatever of the weight of the coin. Yeah,
the accuracy can't be maintained by the average person.
Right.
So how does that? What's the assumption that the Gemara and this whole topic assumes about the average consumer?
I think they're giving the average consumer the credit for the eye test. What is the eye test? When you go into a store and you handle money, or a shopkeeper gives you money, or whichever way it is, and you get money and you look down at it, then the Gemara is assuming that everybody who handles money, I mean any adult, let's say, who handles money, will look at a coin and say, this coin is thinner than what I know it should be. A seller should be a half an inch, let's say. This is, and by the way, it may be an optical illusion, but when a coin is thinner, it looks wider. In other words, if it's flatter because of the depth, even though it may not have changed its circumference, it looks that way because it's flatter. So the Gemara is telling us that when a coin starts thinning out, then people realize, this coin isn't what it is. Now, will a person know that it's reduced by a shekel, by half or not? There, maybe not so much. I mean, how is someone going to know? Oh, it's actually a fraction of an ounce, or fraction of a measure above what it should be. So it's still okay because you can use it as a shekel. But you're right. That I don't think that we're counting on that. We're not counting on people understanding that as much. But we do count on people raising a question. If a storekeeper gives them a coin and says, "What are you giving me here?" And then, by the way, storekeepers always had weights on their counter.
Assuming that the seller has a scale and
A
he can
scale.
prove
So that
prove the value.
Right, so it was perfectly appropriate to take that coin and put it on the scale and say,
Right, show
"Oh,
me."
you see, it's worth a fraction. It's a shekel. It's a half a selah." Or the guy will say, "Wait a minute, it's dipped below half. This you have to remove this because it's not even worth a
Right,
shekel because it's a fraction below."
So that becomes the assumption that the seller's required to have a scale to be able
they
to
did,
prove
and that was
the
part of the
value.
halacha, is that
Yeah.
they have to be meticulous in terms of weights and measures. And we know from the Torah that a seller always has to be, when a seller isn't meticulous, then he's substantially guilty of all kinds of isurim because he has stolen from his customers. So I would say that probably they all had scales and they all had to measure. So that when they were
So here's the other
measured,
thing, though, the interesting and part of it was, well, we'll say is an honor system, because scales today, they're, you have electronic scales, or even with the analog type. They didn't have scales like that where you put something on it would say 3.2 ounces.
right?
So essentially, every scale was a balance of some sort. Might have effectively multiplied it, but effectively a balance of some sort. And so you're relying on what are they using as the master weight there.
Right.
And so if they had some sort of, I don't know if we've had it for a few hundred years, but I don't know if they had anything like back then to say, this is a master weight of exactly one, the same weight as one seller.
The Gemara says that. The Gemara says that they had exact weights that they used.
Certified weights.
Okay.
Certified weights, right? Exactly what they did.
So that's really the key. Now, of course, if somebody tried to cheat on that, they'd have to play games, because they would have the weight's a little on the low side, that you get people to end up paying more money or less money or whatever. You have to, if you use the same scale for in and out, then
Well, that's why the Torah is so
Right.
makbid.
Yeah.
It gives us all kinds of admonitions as to people who are in business keeping accurate weights and measures, because the issur is so great when you cheat by a fraction and don't have an exact weight. So anyway, so the
Somebody
Gemara
must have manufactured standard weights for people to buy for their scales, and they were probably marked with something that says this is a kosher weight.
Yeah.
Otherwise you can't rely on the consumer to see these differences.
Exactly. And that's why the entire emphasis is on the seller, that he has to be makbid because he controls the weights, and the issur is very great when you basically the buyer will be at your mercy because he won't know the difference. So now the seller ad shekel. Now the next line, bediner. Now remember, there are 2 shekolim in a selah, and there are 2 dinarim in a shekel, right? So there are 4 dinarim in a selah. It's like our system: $1, 50 cents, and a quarter. So the dinar is a quarter. So now, the Gemara says, "B'selah ad shekel, b'dinar ad rova." Look at the language. Says the Gemara that for a dinar, then until it is a quarter, it's still kosher. Notice. So, okay, this is going to be the subject of a deep inquiry, because what does it mean? Why does it not say, just like it says b'selah shekel, which is half, why does it not say b'dinar at chatzi or whatever, In other words, why is it not parallel to what we just said about a seller? It seems to have changed the equation from seller to shekel, which is 50%, and all of a sudden dinar adrova up to a quarter. What does the quarter mean? So we're going to hold off on. So Rashi says, let's take a look. Rashi says, the seller ad shekel, seller hatvua upoches v'holech ad shekel, a seller which has been reduced up to half to a shekel, mutter lekaimo, you're allowed to use it in commerce. Then also the ramos, bo b'nei adam, l'mocha the seller yofe. It's not an inducement for people to use the seller as a full seller. To your point, Jay, how do people know? Because it's recognizable that it isn't a seller. This is definitely not a seller. No one's going to say, oh, I'm buying it for $1. Therefore, since it's so obvious that it's not recognizable, we allow to use it in commerce for what it is, which is a shekel, half the amount. But once it gets reduced to less than a shekel, lo yikai menu, you can no longer keep it. Why? Shabol ramos ulamofas b'torah shekel, because a person is going to use it as a shekel and cheat people. Ain't pacha shalom nicker, because the little fraction of a difference between a shekel and less than a shekel is not recognizable. You can't tell, oh, this is one millimeter, one fraction below a shekel. Legabe shekel, mitok shehu rochav, because it's wider, shebetchila. Well, it's wider, shebetchila hayosela enenira choser mishekel. And you can't, in other words, in its original form, when it was like a half an inch thick, then everybody knew it was a seller. Once it started eroding and becoming thinner and thinner, people could recognize, oh, this is no longer a seller. You got to make sure that it is not less than a shekel. So then the storekeeper would have to make sure that it wasn't less than a shekel, which he couldn't use at all, right? Shekel hu matbeya shel chatzi selah, says Rashi. A shekel is a coin of half a selah. The dinar and a dinar matbeya cotton. It's a physically smaller coin. Shnayim mehem yesh b'shekel. In other words, just like we have dimes and quarters, right? Dime is a smaller nickel, and in other words, the denominations of valuation are also accompanied by a different size. So when you look at a coin, you right away say this is a quarter or a dime. I'm not going to declare, wait a minute, is this a dime or is it a nickel? I'm not sure. So we demark it by having a different size. The same in the time of the Gemara, the dinar was a smaller coin. 2 dinarim equaled a shekel. A shekel was a bigger coin, the size of a selah, but it was, you could tell that it was a shekel by its thickness. And then when it was even a little bit more, when it was thicker, whatever the amount, then it became a selah. So the selah and the shekel did not vary in size, but the shekel and the dinar did vary in size. So then the Gemara is telling us as follows. It's a little sort of esoteric here, but it's important. A selah at a shekel, you can use it because you can use it as a shekel. Everybody knows it's a shekel. The dinar, for a dinar, ad rova, up to a quarter. Okay, so says Rashi, the dinar ad rova, the mohoya dinar nifachas at she'omed al rova. If the dinar was reduced in physicality, it was rubbed out until it became a quarter, mutter lekaimo, it's still permitted to use it in commerce. Because people thought rova dinar kamar. People think we're talking about a quarter of a dinar, rova dinar kamar. For the kame parech and the Gemara, and Rashi right away says later the Gemara is going to ask, Maishno sela de lo motza l'shai alat chatzia v'dina ad rova. The obvious question is, why is a selah only good up to half, meaning a shekel, and why is a dinar good up to a quarter? Why do we have different measurements for dinarim than we have for selah? Rashi is portending the future Gemara kasha. Why is that? right? Mishachosav omen al pakus meruba lo yikamenu dosala fuke meruba. So, in other words, why are we dealing with quarters and not halves? Because Sela, we're dealing with a half, which is a shekel. A dinar, we should also deal with a half. Why are we dealing with a quarter? We're going to hold that thought because the Gemara is going to discuss that in a minute. Now, the Gemara also now adds another line, which is very cryptic. Pachos mikain iser. If it's an iser less than this, also. Rashi right away says, Pachos mi'iser, Pachos mikan iser, lekame mefarish. What does that mean? After telling us that a seller up to a half and a dinar on a quarter, the Gemara introduces a line, Pachos mikain iser. If it's an iser less than this, what is this? Osir, it's osir. So let's hold it because we don't know what the Gemara is saying here. Okay. Now the Gemara goes on and says, Harizel lo yim karena. If you reach the point of less than a shekel or a quarter of less than a quarter of a dinar, then go back to the original question, how long can you keep it in circulation? Says the Gemara, lo yim karena. You shouldn't sell the coin as any kind of another. Don't sell that coin. That coin should really be taken out of circulation. Why? So the Gemara, lo tager, lo choron, lo lahorag. Be careful because it might find its way into the hands of a merchant or the hands of an extortionist, someone who extorts, lo lahorag, or a murderer. What does he mean? Why use these expressions? Because these types of people, and unfortunately includes merchants, these types of people are likely to deceive the oilo, right? So if you sell it to them, a merchant's going to say, you know what, this coin has no value. I'll give you, I'll give you 10% of its value. Let me have it. I collect them. Don't do it, because once you do it, it'll find its way back in circulation, and someone will be cheated. So the Gemara is giving us an admonition, already a forewarning. When a coin looks like this, do not sell it, because it'll go to the wrong's hand. So what should you do? Ella yikvena, says the Gemara, you should make a hole in it, right? B'yislena b'tzaver b'no or b'tzaver b'ita. Basically, make a necklace out of it. In other words, take this coin, punch it through. You see people, I remember, especially in Israel, but everywhere, they used to have asimonim with holes in them, and they wore them around their neck. That was a shtick maybe 30 years ago, maybe more, or whatever. And we see that too today. We see people with coins of different denominations that have holes in them, and they wear them as necklaces. Actually, that's the remedy of the Gemara. The Gemara is saying, take it. Once you punch a hole in it, it already has. It's known to be a spoiled coin, and use it for some decoration or something. But don't keep it in circulation. It's a colorful way of saying don't allow other people to commit fraud with it.
So that assumes that he can't go back to whoever gave him that coin and claim that it isn't good enough. In other words, he takes the loss. That coin is taken
That coin is gone, right?
Right. So that
You can't track it back up the chain anymore.
right. The coins are fungible unless you spot it right when the merchant gives you change, and you could protest on the moment, say that seller doesn't look legit. Give me a better one.
Legit, right.
But once
Right.
you walk away, the coins are all the same, and you can't tell.
Yeah,
Right.
Yeah.
But so here's the thing. In the modern world, you would take your messed up dollar bills, or presumably your messed up coins, and you'd go to you could go probably to any bank, but at a worst case, you would go, you go to the mint, the Treasury Department, et cetera, and you would say, and they have procedures to do this. You would say, here's this, and they would turn these wrinkled, messed up, torn dollar bills and these rubbed off quarters and so on into, quote, modern, real, up to date,
Right.
clean, fresh money. And so you're not out a penny.
Right.
But here it seems that even though there was a mint that was making the coins, it seems that you couldn't go to the mint and do that. Presumably you could get the silver coins, you could get the silver weight, but then you're out it's only 75 cents worth, worth of silver, so you wouldn't
Right.
get $1 back for the coin. So you're out there as well, because otherwise everybody would overload the mint with it, and the mint would
It's
go out of business.
buyer beware.
So it's
Right,
buyer
and
beware, and
yeah.
yet the stuff would somebody it rubs off. It happens a little bit, and all of a sudden somebody's stuck.
Right.
Because when you use it as a necklace, you're not getting anything near full value out of it.
Right. So there's no reference at all to quote unquote the mint, to the original source. But you're right, Menashe, is that we've become, again, in the idea of full faith and credit. Our government stands behind every coin. There's no suggestion. Again, you would think maybe there would or should have been something like that in the time of the Chazal, but there wasn't, where you could go back to some government source and say, look at this. You can clearly see this was a seller. No one's taking it as a seller. I want my money back. I want a full seller. So there's no reference at all to that kind of. It's basically you got to deal with what you got, and if the person who gave you the coin, you have to be at your wits. You have to look at your coins, look at your change, and say, wait a minute, And of course, the poor merchant. I mean, he's busy all day taking money. He may have been duped. Somebody slipped him a seller that wasn't the seller, and he didn't even notice it, right? Because you go to some of these stores, especially the Makolet, the guy he dumps it in his box. He doesn't even look at it. It looks close, fine. It is what it is. But at a Hanami, so someone along the line, it could be taking a loss here. But this is the instruction that the Gemara is giving us. This is how you don't pass on the deceit. Okay, I got cheated, so he's going to get cheated. I took a loss, he's going to take a loss. We don't really go for that. So
you're right about
we have an overall picture from this brisa and from the Gemara, what it is that we're talking about in terms of money and valuations. Now,
when you go to the Shuk in Yerushalayim on Friday, they don't have time to look at.
They don't have time to look at anything. Exactly.
They're looking for the next customer to buy stuff.
Yeah, exactly. Unless you have some
Hawkeye
Hawkeye vendor who's been cheated enough times that he has, an instant recognition when he gets a coin that it's a fake coin. But who knows?
Or fake dollar bills today.
At the Shuk, they sell those coins that people throw away.
They sell them?
They sell them, yeah. Coin collectors.
Coin collectors, yeah. Okay, there you go.
So one man's treasures is another man's, or one man's junk is
another man's treasure.
Yeah,
exactly. All right. So let's try to wrap up our thinking here. So this is where we are now. Omar Mar. So Mar says we just got through this piece of Gemara, and we asked the question. Why is a seller measured different than a dinar? The seller is with a shekel, which is half, and a dinar is a quarter. Omar Mar, besela at shekel b'dinar rova, with a seller is described as being valid ad shekel to the point of a shekel. Less than that, it's not. B'dinar ad rova, my shnor besela ad shekel. Why are we using the measure of a shekel, which is half the size? It's the kasha. We just asked that question. It's so obvious. Why are we using a different fraction, a different denomination for the selah as we are for the dinner? Why not be consistent? That's the kasha. Oma Abaya. Says Abaya, no, you don't understand. Ma rova diktani. Nami, when the Gemara says a quarter, when the Brisa says by a dinar, it's rova. What does that mean? It doesn't mean a quarter of a dinar. No, it's rova shekel. It's a quarter of a shekel, which is a half a dinar. In other words, Abaye is telling us we're using a different terminology, but don't be confused. A selah is good up to a shekel, 50%. A dinar is good up to a quarter of a shekel, which is a half a dinar. So it's kind of like scratching your right ear with your left hand. We're saying the same thing, but we're using a different terminology. We're going to have to understand why we use a different terminology. But Abaya's answer is that there is not a stira here, because when the Gemara says Selah is good at shekel, you can use it at shekel. Less than that, it's no longer valid because it's less than even a shekel. So therefore, you can't use it at all. With a dinar, it's the same thing. A dinar is a different size coin. It's a smaller coin. So when the dinar erodes to half, it's still valid. That is called a quarter of a selah. Now you're going to ask the kasha, why do we use, it's the same thing. We now know that it's all 50%. Up to 50% is valid. The kasha now is, why do we use a different terminology? So now, Rava, so Rava is going to explain Dekanami, that Abaya is right in what he described, that he said it means Rova Shekel. Why? Now listen to this. This is, you're talking about words. The Kotani Rova, because it says a quarter, and a quarter means a quarter of a selah. Velo Kotani Revia, and it doesn't say, Revia is almost the same word. It has the same lettering. It's the same. It's not a Revia, which would indicate Revia of a dinar. So Rava is really parsing these words very, very carefully, and he's saying that when we learn pshat, that a selah is good up to a shekel and not less because it's 50%. That same 50% applies to a dinar as well. So a dinar is good up to 50%. Less than that, it's not good. We call it, in the terminology of our parlance, we call that rova selah, because the selah was the dominant coin of the time. So we say, oh, it's a quarter of a dollar. Okay, so in other words, selah everybody uses as the dominant vehicle for monetary, consideration. And we say rova, it's a quarter of that denomination. But if it meant a quarter of a dinar, which l'chayra in the beginning of our Gemara, we thought it meant a quarter of a dinar, we didn't understand. How could it be a quarter of a dinar? Says Rava, no. If it was a quarter of a dinar, it would have said revia. Shema mina. From here we hear that it's all about the selah, and a shekel and a dinar up to half a shekel is good because of rova. But if it is less than revia, it's less than 1/4 of the value of the dinar, then you can't use it. It's a little bit of a strained way. I mean, I don't know why the Gemara had to use that language. Quite frankly, it still begs the question, other than to say that quarter was referring to the selah, which is the dominant coin of the time. So Nistama, when everybody said a quarter, just like when you say, give me, I want a quarter. Everybody knows it's a quarter of a dollar, right? You're not talking about a quarter of a 50-cent piece, right? I mean, so in other words, in the language of the time, that rova was known as a half a dinar. That's what Rava is telling us. So therefore, it's not a stira. Even though the Gemara uses the term rova, it means rova of a selah, not of a dinar. Says Rashi. Says Rashi. Pachas mekain aser. Pach mekain iser aser. Remember what we said, the very cryptic language, less than an iser is also the common parish. Lo yim kareno, dusha amro also the kaima lo hitiruli shim kareno b'demea lo letager. In other words, once we say it is now possible, don't you dare sell it to a merchant. Lo lechorav adam onas adam onas is someone who extorts, someone who strong arms you. Not to a rotseya. Why? And by the way, this is almost like a generic example. Because these types of people will cheat people. a murderer won't think twice about cheating someone for money. Neither will an extortionist. And from fear, you can't. And because you're afraid of the guy, because he's going to threaten you, you're going to say, okay, fine, I'll give you full value. Here, take full value. So in other words, don't even give it to them to put them in a position to extort you. Rova shekel. What is rova shekel? Matbeya kotam. Shel chatzi dinar. That's what Rashi was explaining. It's a small coin of about half a dinar. Sela Medina. It's called the Sela of the Medina. In other words, there were different terminologies for Sela depending on where you were, where you live. So Sela Medina is known as this Chatzi dinar. Lamalei Lamilta Ladina B'Shekel. Lema Bedina Ad Chatzi Zuz. This is Oshem Shakel in Pichas HaShekel at Chatze B'Nasa Dinar Mutter L'Kaimo L'Hotze B'Dinar. Okay, so now, okay, so we'll conclude here. So what do we see? Where are we? What we've basically gone through what's the word? A course in coinage. In what was the word? What do you use, Menashe? What's the term?
Numismatist.
Numismatist. So we have become semi-experts in the realm of coinage, and to understand how important it was at the time. Because remember, they didn't. Yes, they had IOUs and everything else. They didn't have credit cards. Everything was done really with money. So money had to become something that everybody was adept and understanding, whereas today people walk around never have a nickel in their pocket. There's no such thing. To most people, money doesn't exist. It's about a credit card. It's about whatever. So, but yet in the times of the Gemara, this was so integral to their lives that they had to understand. And again, I'm with you. Whoever asked the questions, Jay, and the concerns about. What am I, an expert to understand that a coin became rubbed out to the point where it's more than a shekel, less than a shekel? I mean, you're talking about you got to go around maybe with a little sharpened glass, so it's a magnifying glass it is, that you can actually look and see and evaluate. I mean, that's not the way to go around. Now, how long did it take? It probably took a while before a coin really got rubbed out. It didn't happen every day. It took quite a while for a coin to be in circulation before it really got rubbed out to the point where it's a chatzi shekel or not a chatzi shekel. But the fact of the matter is that these were important issues, not to make light of as we learned this, how critical this was in their lives, that they had to understand what to do and how to do it with money, and when money should be in circulation, whether money should be taken out of circulation. So anyway, this is not a small matter, even though it almost seems like a throwaway. It still is a very sophisticated part of the understanding of the times and how they work. So next week, we'll continue a little bit further in this discussion, but it's a fascinating to understand maybe how our Chazal lived 2,000 years ago.
Yeah, just didn't Avraham buy Arba Mayo shekel for the land?
That's right, Arba Mayo shekel kesef. So yes,
you can imagine that he bought it from I forget.
Ephraim. Believe me, he checked every coin.
That's what I'm getting at. He must have checked every single coin.
He checked every coin to make sure that it wasn't rubbed out and worth less than the full 400 shekel kesef. Absolutely, you're right, Jack.
Rabbi, one additional point about the role of Chazal is that they were living in an era in which coins were the main thing for commerce, and they were interpreting the written Torah, which was given at a time when coins were unknown. The only thing that had to do with money was weighing out metallic pieces, bullion or bars.
Well, no, because they had the Malchus shekel. But it wasn't as established to dinars and sellers and this.
But everybody had shekalim because everybody had to contribute.
Yeah, right. But for commerce,
it wasn't.
It was almost unknown to use coins. And here at the period where they're interpreting the law, coins were the coin of the realm. That was the
Right.
main
And it
thing.
wasn't just Israel, it was Rome
They were
and
making
Greece
an
and everybody
adjustment.
else had mints
Yeah.
too. Yeah. But the other thing is that this is like, we look at it and say, wow, so it was common knowledge that people would know, oh, you'd look at a coin and you'd be able to gauge whether it's, underweight and so on. But it's like, there's so many other things we see in Gemara and so on about how people, everybody, so to speak, knew about different parts of animals and stuff, whereas we're all, or almost all of us are city boys, and we don't know whether we can tell the
know.
difference between, a cow and a horse, but that's beyond that, forget it.
Right, right. No, again, things have changed so much. So it's fascinating to have this, as we said at the very outset, to have an opportunity to look back and understand how the Chazal lived. And again, what do we extrapolate from that for our time? Because there is halachic consequences even today from all these Gemaras, from what we're talking about in terms of coinage and everything else. That, look, the underlying lesson, of course, is honesty in commerce, as Menashe, as you pointed out. I mean, weights and measures, which the Torah dictates to us, is as important in the 21st century as it was then. People who cheat with weights and measures are violating the Torah, just as they were in those days. You have to be scrupulous, and sometimes you have to be extra scrupulous if you're a merchant, so that there shouldn't even be the shadow of a chashash. Oh, he's tipping the scales. He's not doing something right. And of course, you have, right? I think for many stores, we have, what is it? Either agriculture or one of the other major agencies. Don't they actually have field agents who?
Yeah, they go around, test the scales and all the and all the
That's
stores,
right.
yeah.
So you see how makbid they are, even though they may not do a great job, and it's once in a blue moon. But in principle, they're still supposed to uphold the full faith that the people are their honesty, and that we should honesty in commerce. Otherwise, it's a lawless society. So there has to be at least the understanding that there will be consequences. So what the Chazal, I mean, it may have been an honor system. Let's just say maybe at the time, maybe there weren't inspectors in the time of the Gemara who did it, but we were on our honor that the Torah's admonition of keeping honest weights and measures is something that keep people in line. But anyway, it's a fascinating discussion, and so Mitzvah next week we'll pick it up. We'll pick it up further, and we'll go weiter.
Shkoyach.